Good afternoon to you. 406 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up in the next hour, 5 o'clock, the former and perhaps future president of the United States, Donald Trump, will be joining us. Had a big conversation with him last night. I will air it in its entirety in the 5 o'clock hour. You can join us, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Of course, one of the topics that comes up during my conversation with President Trump is the state of our border. We are undergoing an immense invasion right now. In fact, according to Allie Bradley over at News Nation, she got some leaks here, that migrant encounter numbers for February have exceeded last February's numbers by more than 30,000, according to Department of Homeland Security sources. 189,973 people crossed into the United States through the southern border last month. Those would be all illegal border crossers. That's compared to about 150,000 last year. So it's going up dramatically, and that is yet another record February under Joe Biden, a record month for border crossings. For more on that and so much more, I want to bring in Mark Krikorian, the executive director for the Center for Immigration Studies, who joins us now. Mark, good to have you back with us, sir.
Glad to be here.
So things are not slowing down on the border, although the Biden administration has pretended they are, at least.
Well, they did go down from December to January, and although they did the same thing last year. The administration kind of was declaring mission accomplished. What they did is, one of the things they did is got the Mexican army to try to disrupt some of this smuggling, and they benefited from Governor Abbott in Texas.
Yeah.
Disputing people. No, the answer is this is not going away. They're hoping they can try to get Mexico and other countries to do their job for them, but it's our border and we need to enforce it. And these guys are just unwilling to do what's necessary to stop illegal immigration.
The head of the Border Patrol, Raul Ortiz, just spoke with 60 Minutes over the weekend, and he had this to say. He's like, I've never actually met with Joe Biden.
I've never had one conversation with the president or the vice president for that matter. And so I was the chief of the Border Patrol. I commanded 21,000 people. That's a problem.
I mean, that is a problem. He's right about that. And it definitely demonstrates that they have no interest in solving this, do they?
No, not at all. I mean, they don't. They just don't consider it that important. If anything, the people in the administration, especially the sort of younger folks who do a lot of the work, they probably think the Border Patrol is some kind of fascistic whatever it is, and they wouldn't want the president or vice president to meet with them. But you got to wonder, this is just political malpractice. Whatever you think about policy, the idea that Mrs. Borderzar, the vice president, or President Biden wouldn't even once have had a photo op with the head of the Border Patrol, even considering this is their biggest vulnerability. It's just, it's almost inexplicable until you realize that these guys, that this administration, the people running immigration, think that immigration enforcement is just wrong. This is just part of the defund the police kind of perspective, and they're not defunding the Border Patrol, but frankly, they would like to, and they're certainly not going to spend any time talking to the head of the Border Patrol.
Yeah, well, in fact, it's so bewildering to even places like CNN. They were asking Alejandro Mayorkas this weekend whether this is some sort of big electoral policy, like they're just bringing in voters to change the elections in the United States. Here's that exchange.
Is it the policy of the Biden administration to allow as many migrants to come across the border in order to change the political dynamics, the electoral dynamics of America?
Of course not. And the facts indicate that that is absolutely false. Since May of this year, of last year, we have removed or returned more individuals than in any year since 2015, and we haven't even run 12 months.
What do the facts tell you, Mark Krikorian?
Well, I actually don't think that this administration is driven by an agenda of importing voters. I actually don't think that's what this is about. They're, way down the line when some of these people end up becoming voters, sure, they're happy to have that. I'm not saying that they're against it. I just don't think that's what's driving this. What's driving this, and whether it's Mayorkas's views or anyone else in the administration, is ideological. they don't believe the American people have the right to keep anybody out. They think immigration law is Jim Crow. And I don't mean like Jim Crow. They think it actually is Jim Crow. And so they're fine with subverting the immigration law. They don't think it is morally defensible. And that's actually worse, in my perspective, than it was some kind of cynical plot to import voters.
Yeah.
Because how do you argue against that? That's an unbridgeable gulf. They think immigration limits are immoral. And I think the political discussion should force them to openly say that so voters can understand what's at stake here.
Well, to the point that they will not acknowledge in any meaningful or detailed sense the horrors that have been visited upon the American people as a result of this border. So they don't talk in detail about the fentanyl and all of the hundreds of thousands of Americans who are dying. They don't talk about the destruction the cartels have wrought. They don't talk about the deaths at the border. They don't talk about Lake and Riley. Alejandro Mayorkas refused to even say her name this weekend on CBS when he was asked about her. He said that it was a tragedy and that our hearts are with, quote, the family. But that's it. They don't want to talk about the downsides here.
No, certainly not. And, look, there's a lot of illegal aliens, and some of them are going to be criminals, and sometimes, the government may not have a responsibility there. But this poor woman's murderer was actually in custody and then let go into the country and then protected by sanctuary policies. Those government policies, both at the federal and the local level, are responsible for this woman's death. This isn't some indirect thing. Well, the government should have done a better job at the border and this guy snuck by. Well, okay, the government would bear some responsibility for somebody like that who committed a crime. But this is way more direct connection. This guy was in their hands. They decided to let him go. And sorry, but that means that some of the blood of Ms. Riley is on the hands of this administration.
Yes, unquestionably so. And, to go back to your point before that they think that we have some sort of moral obligation to allow the masses of the world to come into the United States, they clearly don't trust the American public with that judgment because they keep the details of the way they're importing foreign nationals a secret. In fact, the Center for Immigration Studies, your organization, has just released some new information on the secret flights that the Biden administration is orchestrating to bring foreign nationals all across our country. What have you learned?
There's some people may be familiar with that CBP-1 app. There's been a lot of talk about that. It helps illegal aliens schedule their illegal immigration. Well, there's another aspect to that where people use that app to fly over the border directly to interior U.S. airports from 9 countries. They have the administration has started this parole program, which is all illegal, where people who have no right to come here are simply waved into the United States by this administration. Last year, about 1/3 people, 320,000 people, were flown directly to U.S. airports. And so we asked, with the Freedom of Information Act request, what airports did they go to? How many people went to each airport? They won't tell us. It's still in litigation, but they won't tell us. And the reason they gave was that there are so many people going to these airports that it overwhelms them. They're not using these words, but this is what they're saying.
Yes.
It overwhelms their ability to securely run these airports. In other words, it is a security threat to tell us which airports these people are going to for this program that they themselves have created. So the Biden administration's parole program to fly illegal immigrants into the United States is creating a security threat. So they can't tell us where they're going.
Now, again, if this is some sort of moral good that we should be doing this because it's the right thing to do, why are they being so secretive about the operations?
Well, one assumes, there's 2 possibilities. One is the administration is exaggerating the security threat in order not to release politically harmful information. The other option is that they're telling the truth, and the Biden administration's own policies are creating security vulnerabilities within the United States. Neither one of those is particularly good, but it's all driven by the idea that we have an obligation to let in anyone who wants to come here. And I'm sorry, but that's what needs to be the basis of debate over immigration, not just the symptoms, like the murder of Lake and Riley and things like those are all important. But what you need to get Democratic politicians on the record to say is, do you believe there should be limits to immigration? And if so, what are you willing to do to actually enforce those limits? And they're just not willing to enforce immigration limits. They don't think it's the right thing to do.
No, by the way, I do see that I've got somebody on hold right now who has a very good question, or at least learn something. I'm gonna preempt Daryl's question for a moment. Daryl, hold tight. I want to take your call in a moment, but I do want to ask Mark Krikorian about this. I've seen a couple times that, selective service, our selective service system here in the United States,
right,
where you can sign up to be drafted if necessary into combat, requires that they say undocumented immigrants register. That is according to the federal government. Do you know off the top of your head, Mark Krikorian, whether or not all of these military-age males who are crossing our border are signing up for selective service?
I have no idea, but really, do you think they're doing that? No, of course
I doubt it, but aren't they obligated, though?
They're legally obliged. It is a criminal offense not to sign up for the draft. Now, there is no draft, but for some potential future draft, yeah, absolutely. And are they not doing it? Of course not. And that's just one of the many laws that supposedly law-abiding illegal aliens are not complying with. That storyline. They're all law-abiding other than violating criminal, immigration law. Well, that's not true, because they're engaging in identity theft, Social Security fraud, all kinds of stuff, as well as not complying with the requirement to register for selective service. It's
also fascinating. Well, thank you for following the details so assiduously. I really appreciate it. It's always so helpful. Mark Krikorian from the Center for Immigration Studies. Thank you, sir.
Anytime. Thank you.
Good to talk to you. And let me get to Daryl in Alexandria now, line 2. Daryl, thank you. Again, didn't want to steal your thunder here, but this is something I've been thinking about, too. Good afternoon, sir. Go ahead.
No, Vince, thank you so much for having me on. I saw you at CPAC 2 weeks ago, and I didn't get a chance to shake your hand, so thank you for doing yeoman's work and the Lord's work on the show.
Nice.
But,
thank you.
I was called to jury duty in Alexandria, Virginia, which is a very, very Democrat place. It's about 80% Democrat, 20% Republican. And sitting there in the jury room, so we're not allowed to have our phone, I pulled up something from the Virginia State Bar, and it's a little booklet on the rules of what happens once you turn 18 for anyone residing in the United States. And this is a little booklet from 2021, and as you know, Mayor Justin Wilson is very, very Democrat. So I opened it up to the selective service, like you said. So thank you so much, Vince, for bringing it up. And I started reading, and I was so shocked at the woke language that was in this little booklet by the Virginia State Bar. And if you may, it says for selective service system, all males between the ages of 18 and 26 who are not citizens of the United States must register unless they have legally entered the country as non-immigrants. And it goes on and it says, although it may seem unusual, illegal aliens are still required to register for the selective service. One, I was surprised, Vince, that it said illegal. It used the word illegal aliens,
right,
and it said they must register. But here's the kicker, Vince. Here really, really, truly is a kicker, and I'd never heard a politician, I'd never heard someone sitting in office or running for office, or even you on the radio or Dan Bongino on the radio say this. Mm-hmm. For failing to register, here's a kicker. You could be convicted of a federal crime punishable for up to 5 years in prison and a fine for up to $250,000, even if you need more reasons to register. Here's 2 of them. But I hear people over and over, Vince, they say, well, they cross the border illegally. That's the only law they're breaking. But as your previous caller just said, and you just stated, they're breaking multiple laws. We don't need to add new laws to the books. We just need to follow the laws that are currently on the books.
So you say the penalty there, as you point out, Daryl, 5 years, $250,000. Those are like January 6th defendant penalties we're talking.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I don't think we've ever convicted anyone on the selective service. And I'm retired military, so when I see this, and we're short on the military. So, hey, General Austin, if you're listening to Vince Coglianese right now on the radio, you have a whole pool of illegal aliens that are willing to serve in the military if we go under war with China. So listen up.
Yeah, and by the way, that's and there are many service members who've earned American citizenship through their service to the country. That has happened a lot in our history. But here you have, I have been wondering this very thing for some time. I'm glad you brought it up, Daryl. Just wait a second. Even if you're illegal, you're supposed to sign up for selective service. And we've got all these military-age males pouring across the border. And as both you and Mark Krikorian just stated, there you go. If they're not doing it, one, that's DHS not getting people to sign up like they're supposed to. And two, it's yet another crime being committed by the people who are illegally immigrating into the United States.
Yeah, so we're actually bringing this very topic up with a bunch of candidates. So I'm sitting at a forum with Chasing Freedom Virginia, and we're in Springfield, Virginia, and we're hosting the candidates from the 10th District, Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, and we're hosting a forum at 6:30. You can go on the Chasing Freedom Virginia website and find out the details of where exactly it's located. But we're going to ask these candidates if they know about the law, and if elected, would they prosecute this law? Because I think there needs to be more awareness of these laws that are currently on the books to convict these people for illegal activity.
Well, perhaps they're listening, and they'll have a good answer to some of your questions. Thank you, Daryl. I appreciate it, sir. Really, really grateful for your call. Thank you. All right, let's go to the phones. We've got Q calling in from Washington, D.C., line 4. Q, you're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Man, it so is my pleasure for you taking my call. I really appreciate it. Got a great show.
Thank you.
Let me get right to the point. Hey, I'm a career retired Army recruiter. I did about 15 years.
Yep.
Did 26 years active duty. Did about 14 years in recruiting. I'm not crazy, but anyway, you guys are talking about the immigrants joining. I mean, they wouldn't be able to register for selective service because they're not even legal residents. In order for you to join, you got to have a green card.
You're talking Q. Just to be clear, you're talking about two different things. One is the current policy of the United States military, which is, you're right, you do have to have a green card to join the military. But in order to register for selective service, it doesn't matter whether or not you have a green card. According to the Selective Service's own website, I'm reading right here, yes, all undocumented males 18 through 25 years of age, other than those admitted on non-immigrant visas, must register whether or not they have a green card. So it turns out, at least for selective service, it's either way.
You know what, too? Our policies change so fast in recruiting. It changes so fast. That had to change. But that's cool.
Got it.
So, but the thing about it, I see that the concept, not just anybody can be a soldier, sailor, Marine, or airman, stuff like that.
Yeah, and it's a bad idea, by the way, for a random foreigner who has no allegiance to our country, who's just like invading our country, and then they would join the military. That doesn't make any sense to me at all. But so long as it's the law, that's another law they're breaking, isn't it, Q?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that's how I feel about it. I'm glad I took your call. Thank you, Q. I really appreciate the call. All right, hold tight. I've got a lot coming up for you. Donald Trump, certainly I've got his interview coming up on the program. Also, his reaction today to the Supreme Court's decision to protect the ballots across the United States from the left's election rigging. We'll play that. That's ahead. Hey, good afternoon to you. It is 4:36 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. Coming up on the program, my exclusive interview with President Donald J. Trump. Coming up in the 5 o'clock hour, we'll play the whole thing. I had a great conversation with him last night, and we'll be airing it here shortly. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. It's funny for a Trump interview to come together. There's a lot of moving parts, and then when it finally happens, you're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe it's here. In fact, as you may know, I was out Friday. My thanks to Mike Opelka for filling in on Friday. I went off to my brother's wedding down in Jacksonville, Florida. I went down. My youngest brother got married over the weekend. Very exciting. Congratulations to Anthony and Maria on their beautiful wedding. They got married outdoors, and Florida, as you might imagine, has a lot of thunderstorms, and it's just touch and go. At any given moment, the thunderstorm arrives, and then it's gone. And thankfully, the ceremony, just as it concluded, just as the wedding party and the guests had walked from the outdoor area to the indoor area, the heavens opened up and the rains poured down. But not a single drop during the wedding. So that was pretty great. But while I was there, actually just before I took off from Washington to head to Jacksonville, Florida, I got a call from the incomparable Corey and Ganamort. And it was so funny because he was kind of out of breath when he called me. And so he's like, hey, there's this, it sounds like we're on for a Trump interview Sunday. And I was like, wow, you're out of breath. You sound very excited. I said that we have this Trump interview coming. He's like, no, I was just riding my bicycle. I was like, oh, okay. He's like, but I'm also excited. I was like, okay, yeah, me too. I'm very excited. So I'm sitting on the plane. I'm literally like, I'm probably already past the point where I'm supposed to put the phone in airplane mode. But at that point, right, this is the kind of call where you're like, I'm gonna test the stewardess's patience here. So take the call from Corey. Talk about this. All right, let's see. What are we dealing with? What's the technical arrangement? What kind of time constraints are we under? What's it going to look like? And so we set the whole thing up. And at that point, it's still in pencil. It's one of these things, especially with Trump, busy schedule, guys campaigning, Super Tuesday, anything could happen. It's a phone interview. We're going to do this thing over the phone. As far as I'm aware, it's still in pencil, and I'm up in the air without any meaningful contact with the world. And besides, the in-flight Wi-Fi wasn't giving me any contact either. I couldn't even get access to it. So I was just I was in the air going, well, I guess we'll see what happens. So spent the weekend, great wedding, perfect. And just as I'm coming home, and of course we ran into some thunderstorms yesterday too in Jacksonville that delayed all sorts of flights out of Jacksonville. I was like, oh man, do not get in the way of this Trump interview. I get confirmation from Corey. We're on. This is going to happen. We ended up pushing it a little bit back from where we thought it would happen. But last night, 6:20 p.m., I get on the phone. One of Trump's aides tells me, hello, let me get the president, see if he's available. And sure enough, just 30, 40 seconds later, Vince, the president of the United States, or President Donald Trump, she says, is on the phone. And then we were off. And you're going to hear the result of that product in a moment. But it was good. It was good. I recorded the interview from home, so we got on the phone with Trump yesterday, and that was a lot of fun. I had Corey come over to the house. We all hung out during the interview. Then we had pasta afterwards, as we do on Sunday nights, and we talked about the interview and everything that went down. I will say, just by way of preview, we hit a lot of things, of course, over the course of just about 20 minutes of conversation, and that included Super Tuesday. You may have heard some of the clips today on WMAL on our newscasts that Donald Trump is serious about wanting to take a run at winning Virginia in the general election. You hear him say that from time to time, and it's hard to measure whether or not that's just kind of, like bravado, like, yeah, we're going to win New York and California and Virginia. And you're like, is he playing it up? Is he just like, just trying to kick things up in the air? Like, yeah, I can win everything. Or does he really mean it? And my sense of this is that he really does want to take a real run for Virginia. It's been a while, and things have changed a lot over 20 years. It was back in 2004 that George W. Bush did win Virginia during his reelection campaign. But that was the last time a Republican won, a presidential candidate. Could Trump pull it off? Well, recent polling demonstrated that it's possible. I mean, he's trailing by about 4 points against Biden in Virginia, which is, of course, become increasingly blue. But man, as Trump himself talks about, everybody's feeling it. Everybody's feeling it, whether it's the economy, the out-of-control inflation, people losing full-time jobs. The media do not like talking about this. The White House definitely does not like talking about this. But people are losing full-time jobs all across the country. We talk to E.J. Antoni about this on a regular basis. They're taking multiple part-time jobs just to make ends meet. The economy's in a shambles. And some people want a way out. It really, no matter how they vote, they want a way out. And so could that impact be felt in Virginia? Yeah, I think it could. Now, I never underestimate the left's ability to disappoint me. I never underestimate that. That definitely happens all the time where you're like, what are these people voting for? Why do you keep voting for this insanity? And I've said that about Virginia a whole bunch of times. I might say it again this year. But if the conditions have ever been better, I'm not aware of a time. So there's Trump saying that. Also, he talks about the illegal immigration problem. Every state in the country's feeling it. Virginia is not outside the blast zone. They're right in the middle of it. Whether it's the fentanyl deaths as a result of the cartels importing all of that poison into the United States, or it's the actual deaths of the residents, the citizens of Virginia, or it's the sexual assault of citizens of Virginia. A couple weeks ago, a Venezuelan illegal immigrant busted for the sexual assault of a minor in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and that man was in the custody of the Biden administration. In September of last year, 2023, released into the country, sexually assaults children. That's what we're dealing with. So if you'd like a way out, go with the guy who didn't do that to you. That would be Donald Trump. Meanwhile, Joe Biden, whether people want to admit it or not, has blood on his hands. Ask the family of Laken Riley, who is dealing with that horrific circumstance of her death at the hands, allegedly, of an illegal immigrant from Venezuela. So I think Americans everywhere, so many of them are saying they want this disaster to stop. I said, I talked about Nate Silver's assessment earlier in the show. He says that as of right now, 10% of people who voted for Biden in 2020 are now prepared to vote for Trump. That's a huge deal. That's not people sitting at home because they're down on Biden. They voted for Biden in 2020, and now they don't really feel like going out because he hasn't given them much to be excited about. That's people who are like, I am so upset with him, and I so prefer the life I had under the previous guy that the previous guy should become the future guy. That's 10% of Biden voters? If that's the case, we are talking landslide election. Landslide election. Other pieces here with President Trump. He is very skeptical of this doctor's report, this physical from, what is it, Dr. Kevin O'Connor at the White House, who says that, oh, yeah, Joe Biden is as fit as he's ever been. He's so fit for office. You'll hear President Trump say in so many words that he thinks that's a lie. That's a lie. And he resents this whole topic of like, oh, it's just about his age. He said, no, it's not about his age. I mean, given, of course, that Trump is approaching Joe Biden's age, you might imagine that he would bring that up and say, no, it's not just the age thing. It's literally the capabilities. So we get into some of that. We talk about the border visit last week, the side-by-side, the split screen of the two men visiting different areas of the border. Donald Trump going to Eagle Pass, to Shelby Park, seeing a secure border because of the governor of Texas. Meanwhile, you had Joe Biden go to a very sleepy section of the border, Brownsville, Texas, in order to avoid being anywhere near the scene of the worst catastrophes, the worst parts of the invasion. Biden slowly being rolled around by various aides. Donald Trump moving with a lot of concern. And you can see the split screens on all the cable networks, what that looked like. And if you just woke somebody up from a coma, you're like, hey, look at these two guys. Which one should be president just based on visuals alone? Well, it'd be Donald Trump. Donald Trump's the only one who seemed to be dialed in. Joe Biden, I think the dial was on zero. He wasn't moving very well as he was visiting the border. So that was quite the comparison. Also, we get into the Friday arrest. I wasn't here on Friday, of course, as I mentioned, to discuss this, but the Friday arrest of Blaze journalist Steve Baker. Baker was at the Capitol building on January 6th of 2021 and covered the events of that day, and then has relentlessly, like a pit bull, just locking his jaw onto the story, just relentlessly covered the events of January 6th ever since and given everybody every ounce of truth he can possibly get his hands on. As a result of all of that coverage, and of course his own political inclinations, the Biden administration has now charged him. They arrested him and perp walked him on Friday to make him yet another statistic, another warning shot to conservatives, the right, anybody who would dare not vote for Biden all across the country. And so they want to make an example out of Steve. I asked Donald Trump about his case, and I think you'll be very intrigued by his answers here and the chances that he could be one of many who gets a pardon from Donald Trump if and when Donald Trump returns to office next year. So a lot ahead, again, in that interview with the former president of the United States, perhaps future, coming up at the top of the hour. Before we get there, I do want to go back to this decision today, a decision by the United States Supreme Court, 9-0, to say that Colorado and no other state can actually remove Trump from the ballot. They can't forbid voters from having options. That's insane. Here's President Trump responding from Mar-a-Lago today.
I think it will go a long way toward bringing our country together, which our country needs. And they worked long, they worked hard, and frankly, they worked very quickly on something that will be spoken about 100 years from now and 200 years from now. Extremely important. Essentially, you cannot take somebody out of a race because an opponent would like to have it that way. And it has nothing to do with the fact that it's the leading candidate, whether it was the leading candidate or a candidate that was well down on the totem pole, you cannot take somebody out of a race.
Well, he's right about the principle of it, but the intent is specifically because he is the leading candidate. That is why the left is trying to remove him. They hate that voters would prefer him.
The voters can take the person out of the race very quickly, but a court shouldn't be doing that, and the Supreme Court saw that very well.
Yeah, now Donald Trump does, of course, break down what I just said, which is this was because of how well I was polling.
I do believe that will be a unifying factor because while most states were thrilled to have me, there were some that didn't, and they didn't want that for political reasons. They didn't want that because of poll numbers, because the poll numbers are very good. We're beating President Biden in almost every poll. New York Times came out yesterday with a very big poll.
Huge advantage for Trump
in
that poll.
They didn't like that, and you can't do that. You can't do what they tried to do. And hopefully Colorado, as an example, will unify. I know there's tremendous support. They brought our support up very strong in Colorado because people in Colorado thought that was a terrible thing that they did.
How angry is the left at Ketanji Brown Jackson today, do you think? They weren't mad at her for not knowing the difference between a man and a woman. They're probably mad at her that she didn't remove Trump from the ballot. You know? Angry. I thought you were on my side. How dare you? How dare you keep him on the ballot? Let voters have a choice? What are you, crazy? Trump today, he's pleased with the Supreme Court's decision, but he says there's a lot more decisions to come. The next one is whether or not a president is indeed entitled to immunity for official acts that he takes while in office.
And while we're on the subject, and another thing that will be coming up very soon will be immunity for a president, and not immunity for me, but for any president. If a president doesn't have full immunity, you really don't have a president because nobody that is serving in that office will have the courage to make, in many cases, what would be the right decision, or it could be the wrong decision. It could be, in some cases, the wrong decision, but they have to make decisions.
Well, in other words, you can't bog down any president of the United States for taking actions that he's been permitted to make by the American people. That he's been entrusted with power, and so if we destroy the institution of the presidency with nuisance criminal prosecutions, we hamstring the ability to exercise the will of the American people. It's very straightforward. And Trump's saying, I'm entitled to a degree of immunity. He says total immunity, but these are for official acts while in office. We're not talking Donald Trump murdering people in Washington, D.C. or anything like that. The left is out there spreading all these conspiracy theories. Donald Trump will stay president forever. He'll stay president for life if the court grants him any degree of immunity here. And by the way, they wouldn't be granting, they'd be acknowledging, to be more clear, what the office of the presidency entails constitutionally.
And they have to make them free of all terror that can be rained upon them when they leave office or even before they leave office. And some decisions are very tough. I can tell you that as a president, that some decisions to make are very tough.
Yeah. He also says that, a president shouldn't be subjected to endless indictments the second he leaves office. In fact, the left didn't bring these indictments as soon as he left office. They waited till just before the next election to drop all of them.
A president has to be free. A president has to be, if the president does a good job, I did. Some people would say a great job. But if the president does a good job, a president should be free and clear and frankly celebrated for having done a good job. Not indicted 4 times and not gone after on a civil basis and not demanded to pay hundreds of millions of dollars in fines on something that was absolutely perfect.
That's the Letitia James case. Judge Angeron.
There were no victims, where the financial statements were absolutely flawless, where you have disclaimer clauses.
And finally, I'm going to play for you in just a moment some audio from Donald Trump today in that same address, talking about Joe Biden and a warning to Biden that he needs to stop all of this. He needs to stop this. And if he wants to win, he should do it like a man. Do it yourself. Yeah, President Trump, with a message today for President Biden, says, hey, you want to win this election? Stop sending your heavies after me. Why don't you do it yourself?
President Biden, number one, stop weaponization. Fight your fight yourself. Don't use prosecutors and judges to go after your opponent, to try and damage your opponent so you can win an election. Our country is much bigger than that.
Our country is much bigger than that. Normal people are much bigger than that. But you're small. This is a good message. He should stick to that. Fight yourself, Biden. Fight yourself. Coming up, Donald Trump. My conversation with President Donald Trump ahead on our program. You'll hear it live exclusively right here on WMAL. Stay with us.